Over 15 years of successful small-scale agricultural experience to her work as farmer and educator at Troy Community Farm in Madison. And clearly Troy Community Farm is one of this community's great assets. And Claire has been there for 9 years. During those years, she's turned that 5-acre parcel of weedy urban landscape into a highly productive organic vegetable farm, providing food for 120 CSA members, farmers markets, and several local grocery stores. But in addition to growing great food, Claire is also committed to growing a stronger local food community. She plays a critical role in helping further Troy Garden's broader efforts to support the Eat Local movement through Troy's community gardens, kids gardening programs, internship programs, and natural areas, high school youth, college students, and adult volunteers every year through the farm's education program. She's also a board member for MASSAC, represents 35 Wisconsin farmers serving over 10,000 families. You know what an important organization MASSAC is. Has a BA in philosophy and women's studies from Wesley College, currently lives in Madison where she and her partner tend a small backyard apiary, a budding orchard, and a growing vegetable garden, and I just learned that she is a master hula hooper. Oh, yeah. Who knew? So it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Claire Strader.
Thank you all very much. That little hula hooping comment sure lightened my mood a little bit. It's a great honor to be here. Thank you to Neo for his introduction and to Miriam and Reek for inviting me to do this introduction today. I first of all want to point out what to some of you will be very obvious. Michael Pollan and I share a characteristic that is a little more than our interest in food, and that is our absence of hair. And I wanted to make clear that I did not shave my head today in imitation of Michael Pollan, but rather I was born without hair, and it is a simple and harmless quirk of my genetic makeup. But I did think it was worthy of note, since it's somewhat unusual for a man and a woman to share this characteristic. So I first heard about Michael Pollan when my partner brought home a copy of The Omnivore's Dilemma. She had it on loan from a friend of hers who had read it and thought that we might be interested in it as well. And I must admit that when I heard the title, I thought that it was going to be a book about the question of whether or not to eat meat. And I did not agree that I would be interested in this book. I became vegetarian when I was 16 years old, and I spent much of my college years and beyond examining the whys and wherefores of a flesh-free diet. That examination led me to various iterations of stricter and stricter codes of eating, until I finally came out the other side of that as the simple vegetarian that I am today. Along the way, I learned to cook, I learned to grow my own food, and I also learned to eat with the seasons. All of those practices I incorporated both into my lifestyle and into my food choices, and by the time the Omnivore's Dilemma crossed my path, I had no interest in opening up those questions again. It was on a long and dull car ride back from a family wedding that I realized my error. My partner is one of those lucky people who can read in a car, and it just so happened that this trip coincided with her progress through the first chapter of The Omnivore's Dilemma, which is the chapter on industrial corn. She knew that I would be interested in hearing about a fellow farmer and his farming practices, so she began to read aloud about George Naylor and his farm. And from there, we quickly progressed into Michael Pollan's description of the Haber-Bosch process for fixing atmospheric nitrogen, and how that enabled the manufacture of synthetic fertilizer. Those of you who have not read the book may doubt me, but I can assure you that the chemistry of fertilizer has never been so interesting or so easy to understand as Michael Pollan makes it in those pages. At that point, I was hooked, and when I returned home, I started the book again from page 1 and quickly read through it. One thing that I often hear said of Michael Pollan is that he has a unique ability to break down complicated concepts into digestible pieces that most all of us can understand. Though I have been growing food organically and marketing to my local community for most of my adult life, reading Pollan's books has helped me to better understand the greater health, economic, and environmental impacts of local and organic food production. Further, he has helped me to more clearly convey the importance of that work to the hundreds of students, interns, volunteers, and eaters who come to Troy Gardens every year. It turns out that there is much more to our dilemma as omnivores than the question of meat or no meat. Another thing that Michael Pollan has done through his writing and speaking is to help popularize a discussion of our food systems to the point that it is increasingly difficult to find even a child that does not know what is meant by organic food. We have many school tours that visit Troy Gardens each year, and often I ask them, as part of my introduction to the farm, what they know about organic food, and they usually know much more than I expect them to. As farmers markets grow throughout our country, both in number and in size, as CSAs, especially here in Madison, fill their memberships earlier and earlier in the year, and as we eaters look more and more carefully for signs in our grocery stores telling us where our food was grown, we as a community of eaters are developing a deeper understanding of local, small-scale, and organic agriculture. Further, we are beginning to understand and value the humble profession of farmer in a way that we have not for a very long time. I want to thank Michael Pollan for helping me as a farmer to better understand how the work that I do fits in with the big picture of food in our country, and for giving me tools to more fully participate in this discussion about our physical health and the health of our food systems. Michael Pollan is the Knight Professor of Journalism at UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Journalism and the Director of the Knight Program in Science and Environmental Journalism. He has written 5 books, including most recently In Defense of Food. His articles and essays appear in numerous anthologies and magazines, including the New York Times Magazine, Harper's, Mother Jones, and many others. He is also a highly sought after and decidedly skilled public speaker. We are lucky to have him here in Madison. Please welcome Michael Pollan.
Thank you. Does this microphone work? Can you hear me in the back? Yeah. Great. So you ready to hear about the Haber-Bosch process? Yeah. Don't worry. I'm not going to talk about it. You can read about it in the book. Claire, thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. I can't think of a better person to assume the post of White House farmer. And, Madison's loss will be the country's gain. I have been looking forward to checking out the Food for Thought Festival for many years. I've had several friends come speak here over the years, and they all tell me, you've got to come to this event. It's really wonderful. So, and I've had an invitation for the last few years, and I'm really glad I was able to work it out. This is an exceptional event, an exceptional farmers market, and we are here. I don't know that you know how Madison fits into the national scene in this food movement, but this is really one of the important fronts in this battle to change the American way of eating and growing food. Now, did anybody make it to the Kohl Center the other night? It was, if you needed any evidence that there is a movement rising in this country to change the American food system, there it was. I mean, I was humbled and astonished to see nearly 8,000 people turn out to talk about food. And if you needed any evidence that this is not going to be an easy fight and that there will be pushback, you could have that last Thursday night too. This is not going to be easy. And I want to talk a little bit today about this movement, the state of the movement, where I think it is and where I think it needs to go. Our goals, I think, and I'll talk more about this, are very, very simple. The goals are to provide fresh, high-quality food to everyone in America, not just the people who can afford to shop at farmers markets or join CSA. And second, a food system that provides a decent return to America's farmers. And one that, instead of contributing to the crises of health care in America and the crises of climate change and environmental degradation, actually contributes to the solution to those problems. I think we can agree that that's what we're trying to do. So let's see where we are in this food movement. I'm going to read you a quote from a, well, let's call him a prominent critic of the American food system. And you tell me who said this. It's about a year old, this quote. "Our entire agricultural system is built on cheap oil. As a consequence, our agricultural sector actually is contributing more greenhouse gases than our transportation sector. And in the meantime, it's creating monocultures that are vulnerable to national security threats and vulnerable to sky-high food prices or crashes in food prices, huge swings in commodity prices," it's not that grammatical, "and are partly responsible for the explosion in our healthcare costs because they're contributing to type 2 diabetes, stroke and heart disease, obesity, all the things that are driving our huge explosion in healthcare costs." Anyone know who said that?
Obama.
Barack Obama said that last October. It was kind of a surprising statement to read. He said it to a reporter from Time magazine. We have a president now who connects the dots. In fact, he's a supreme dot connector in general, but specifically, he connects the dots between the way we're growing food and feeding ourselves, the healthcare crisis on the one side, and the energy and climate crisis on the other. That's big progress, that idea has reached as far as it has. He has, since the election, has continued to talk about food and agriculture, somewhat, not a whole lot. Just last week, 2 weeks ago, he gave a healthcare forum, which he talked about with enthusiasm about a new farmers market outside the White House, which was opened last Thursday, and also about the importance of connecting local farmers to schools as part of, he said that's in the context of the healthcare crisis. Other things that are very encouraging, kind of tea leaves we can read from Washington, is that Tom Vilsack, the man he appointed to head the Department of Agriculture, has been talking about making nutrition and health the watchword of what the USDA does, about committing the USDA to combating climate change and using crop subsidies to create new incentives on the farm. He's been talking a lot, Vilsack has, about the value of local food and urban agriculture. Now, these are sounds that we have not heard emit from that building ever. Now, you could say it's still just talk, and mostly it is, but there have been some interesting actions too. Prominent among them is the appointment as Deputy USDA Secretary of Kathleen Merrigan. Kathleen is a pioneer of the organic movement. She wrote the original organic law back in 1990 when she worked for Senator Patrick Leahy. She oversaw the development of the organic program, and she is a really committed supporter of not just organics but regional food systems. And she has begun to move USDA's emphasis somewhat incrementally, by degrees, to support more local food systems. Her new Know Your Farmer program, if you don't know about it and you're working on local food issues, you should check it out. She's basically announcing there's a whole lot of grant money for projects to support. So there is some understanding, there is some interest in this issue in Washington. The question is there a mandate for change? Certainly, Obama didn't run on a platform of reforming the food system. Yet, I would argue that he and the federal government will need to tackle these issues sooner or later, and probably sooner. Why? Because unless he does, unless he deals with the food system, he will not be able to deal with the healthcare crisis, which is to say the $2.3 trillion we're spending a year on healthcare, 3/4 of which goes to treat chronic diseases, preventable chronic diseases, most of which are themselves linked to diet. On the other side, he will find, once after hopefully we get a healthcare bill, that once he begins to tackle climate change, that you cannot deal with that problem without addressing the food system, because the food system contributes hugely to the problem of climate change. And energy independence, because about 20% of the fossil fuel energy we use is going onto our fields, into the trucks that are moving our food around, into the processing of our food. Let me just lay out a couple kind of dramatic statistics that show you how deeply implicated food is in these issues that the president has said he wants to deal with. As I said, more fossil fuel than 20% of the total, and contributes more greenhouse gases. This is the food system as a whole. This is from the farm to the plate. Contributes more greenhouse gas, not just CO2, but methane and nitrous oxide to the atmosphere than any other industry. Depending on the studies, and they're all squishy, somewhere between 17 and 34%. It starts with things like clearing land, obviously, but this industrialization of agriculture increases the fossil fuel use by an order of magnitude. The fertilizers made from natural gas, the pesticides made from petroleum, the processing and packaging. It has transformed a system, a way of getting food that once took 1 calorie of fossil fuel energy on the farm to produce 2 calories of food energy. And remember, calorie is just a measurement of energy. You can apply it to a tank of gasoline or a box of Fruit Loops. From 1 calorie of fossil fuel in to yielding 2 out, to a system that now takes 10 calories of fossil fuel energy to produce 1 calorie of supermarket food. That's not a sustainable system. When we eat from this modern industrial fast food system, make no mistake, we are drinking oil and spewing greenhouse gases. If I had a McDonald's double quarter pounder here, sitting here, and I'm happy I don't, and a beaker here, and I wanted to show you how much crude oil it took to manufacture that lunch, I would be pouring oil until I reached the 28-ounce mark on that beaker. That's how much oil goes into every one of those hamburgers, okay? It's also responsible for 13 pounds of carbon going into the air. So we are eating oil and spewing greenhouse gas, which, when you think about it, is absurd, because where does food come from? The sun. The only way, really, to get calories that people can eat is through the sun. It all begins there. So how is it that we've replaced that solar energy, that free lunch, for that is the free lunch, photosynthesis, with so much fossil fuel? Well, that's a long story. It's a story I tell in Omnivore's Dilemma, and I'll tell a little bit of it, but I don't want to go into great detail. I want to focus on one dimension today. I want to focus on food and the healthcare crisis. Since 1960, and this is why I think we are going to turn our attention to the food system as we try to address the crisis of healthcare costs. Since 1960, when I was a boy, spending on healthcare in this country has risen from 5% of national income to nearly 18% today. That's what we're talking about. That's the problem. We won't be able to insure everyone or pay those bills unless we can get those costs under control. Now, there are many reasons for those costs, and there are inefficiencies and perverse incentives in the system, but make no mistake, more than $500 billion a year is going to treat the chronic diseases linked to diet and lifestyle. Okay? The healthcare cost crisis is a synonym for the catastrophe of the American diet. It really is that simple. And that doesn't even count the costs of antibiotic-resistant bugs, which come out of feedlot agriculture. That doesn't count the cost of cancers due to agricultural pollution. That doesn't count a whole lot of costs. That's just preventable chronic diseases. Now, I just said that the cost of healthcare had gone from 5 to 18%. Well, in the same period, the amount of our income we spend on food has fallen from 18% in 1960 to only 9.5% today. So you see there are two lines here that cross what we spend on food in this country and what we spend on healthcare. And as we have gotten the supposed blessing of cheap food, it is costing us in our health and in our healthcare costs. There is, in that sense, no free lunch. So that's the bad news. The food system is broken. I think there's a growing recognition of that. And our agricultural policies, and I think this is an important point, not our farmers, our agricultural policies are responsible for this state of affairs. Now, that wasn't the intention of our agricultural policies. Their intention were really good. They were designed beginning in the New Deal to rescue farmers from a period when prices had fallen to zero on certain days, when you couldn't sell any corn, any milk at any price. And we started supporting farmers to keep them going so we would have food. And over time, our agricultural policies changed. Their initial purpose was to save farmers, but later on it was to deal with what was, for many years, the biggest public health crisis in America, which was simply not enough calories for people. You'll recall when President Kennedy was elected and Michael Harrington wrote his book on poverty in America, and there was shock to learn how many people were still hungry. And our agricultural policies were designed to produce lots of cheap calories, and they succeeded. Farmers met that challenge. When the incentives were to ramp up production, grow as many bushels of corn and soy, as many gallons of milk as you can, our farmers, who were ingenious, answered and did that and produced huge amounts of calories. As it turns out, a few too many. But if the goal of food and health, food and farming policy is to advance the public health, as it originally set out to do, our sense of what that is has changed. And I think that's where we find ourselves. The issue now is not just quantity of food or calories. We now know quality matters too, and that we need to increase the quality of our food. And it needs to be produced in a way that is less reliant on fossil fuel, which we can't count on going forward, and also produced in such a way that it doesn't compromise either our long-term health or the health of the environment. So you see, our needs have changed, but our policies and our incentives have not yet. And really, that's what we need to do. So the good news is, though, that, as I said, that Americans are starting to realize the system is broken. Elements of the government realize it's broken, and a movement for reform is building. And we are part of that here today. That's why many of you are here. And the even better news is this, that the same policies we need to reduce agriculture's contribution to climate change and the energy crisis will also dramatically improve public health. There is no trade-off between those two goals. We can make progress on all these fronts at once, make the system safer, more secure, and more sustainable, not only here in America, but in the developing world as well. What we probably won't be able to do again is make food quite as cheap as it has been, or make it something we can ever take for granted again. Now, Food reform, how you go about it, it's a big chaotic subject. People are working on lots of different elements of it. You've got people working on school lunch, and people working on community food security, access to fresh food in the inner city. You've got people working on labeling laws, more transparency. You have people working in the organic sector. You've got people working on animal welfare and animal rights. It's a big, chaotic, big tent movement. Sometimes it's a little hard to understand the big picture, but sometimes it's also useful to pull back a little and see whether we can't develop some big guiding ideas that could define that tent under which all those different things are going. The value of having a big guiding idea is it helps you judge lots of smaller ideas and whether they're moving you in the direction you want to go. The reason we have policies, either as individuals or as societies or communities, is so that we don't have to rethink every decision every day along the way. So I want to lay out a framework for that, for reform. And a key feature of it I just want to tell you about first is that it is not zero-sum. It does not pit rural farmers against rural eaters, or the interests of health and the environment against those of farmers, as I think you'll see. Here's the core idea. It's very simple. We need to wean the American food system off of its heavy 20th century diet of fossil fuels and put it back on a diet of contemporary sunshine. That's the big idea. Doing that, if we can succeed in doing that, it will do wonders for our health, not to mention the health of our communities and the health of the environment. Of course, it's easier said than done. It will require changes at every link in the food chain, from the farm to the table, and all the marketplace in between. But is it doable? Well, as long as the sun still shines. And if any part of the modern economy can be re-solarized, and we have to re-solarize whole other parts too, surely it is food, because it has that miraculous process at the beginning called photosynthesis. Now, I don't want to do a lot of history, but I just want to remind you how we got here. Since World War II, the emphasis has been, as I mentioned, to ramp up production. Okay, we needed to do this. We needed more calories. We had people after World War II very eager to eat the foods that they had given up during the war because there had been rationing. We had an explosion in population. We had an urbanization. We needed American farmers to grow more food. The way we went about it really was to convert World War II industries into this peacetime agriculture. So we took the munitions industry, the bomb-making industry, which was using ammonium nitrate to make bombs, and we turned that into the modern fertilizer industry. Okay, it's the same stuff as we learned in Oklahoma City a few years ago. We also took a lot of the nerve gases we had developed during the war and turned those into pesticides, also made with fossil fuel. And we, by moving these fossil fuel technologies into the food area, we were able to essentially replace farm labor with these inputs that drove production. And let us acknowledge the achievement of this. It's kind of incredible. 100 years ago, the average farmer was only feeding 20 other people besides his family. The average corn farmer in Iowa today is feeding 143 other people. These are the most productive humans who have ever lived. But of course, they can only be that productive because of cheap fossil fuel. That is really the linchpin of that system. But the achievement is remarkable, and we need to acknowledge that. We need to realize that the fact that you can go into a fast food restaurant and get that bacon double cheeseburger, french fries, and a soda, all 1,000 calories or whatever it is, for less than what you could earn at the minimum wage in 1 hour is, in the history of civilization, quite an achievement. And what that tells us is that the farmers met the challenge we set for them. Now we have a new challenge. because we can't count on that fossil fuel. And we now know that those cheap calories that we were so good at producing aren't necessarily the best ones for us to be eating. So we've learned something, and now we have to change course. So how do we get our food system off of oil? I'm going to outline just the kind of the broad out. I've gone into greater depth in this in some of my writings, and I can point you to it if you want to learn more. But let me just take you through the 3 steps where I think we need action. Okay? The first is on the farm itself. We need to change the set of incentives. Right now, the Farm Bill rewards farmers for growing monocultures. Lots of the same thing. Indeed, the Farm Bill makes it impossible for farmers, corn farmers, who might perhaps want to participate in a market like this and grow fresh produce. They are not allowed to do that. Or they lose, it's no longer corn or bean land. They give up their subsidies to grow real food that people can eat. That's, a shameful situation that needs to be changed. We need to go from subsidies that reward quantity to subsidies that reward quality. We need... I'm not, it's often suggested that when I talk about the fact we're subsidizing high fructose corn syrup and the subsidies are leading to an overproduction of unhealthy calories, that I favor eliminating farm support or farm subsidies. That's absolutely not true. I think what farmers do is so important that we need to support them. We have not had a successful free market in farming ever. And the government will play a role. The question is, what are we supporting? And that's what needs to change. I think we need subsidies that... I'm not a policymaker, okay? And we need other people in this movement who understand policy better than I do. But imagine if we had subsidies that rewarded farmers for how many different crops they have, for how many days of the year their fields are green, and therefore taking in solar energy and turning it into food and carbon in the soil. What if we rewarded farmers for how much carbon they're sequestering every year? That would be a very good metric of how sustainable their farming is and how much they're contributing to solving the climate change crisis. And I think we need to free farmers to grow things besides corn and soy and wheat and rice and cotton. We have plenty of that stuff, and it is not food. It is the raw materials of feedlot meat, high fructose corn syrup, processed foods of all kinds. So we need to change the incentives on the farm. We also need to bring animals back onto farms where they haven't been and bring crops back onto... we need really to depopulate the feedlots and get those animals back to the farm. Wendell Berry has a great line about, and he has a wonderful way of taking the Martian eye view of some of the crazy things we do. But he points out that when we took animals off farms and put them on giant feedlots, I'm talking about the 50,000 animal hog confinement or cattle feedlots, we took a solution and neatly divided it into 2 problems. And that solution is the closed nutrient loop, where the animals eat crop waste and produce fertility for the farm. And once we separated those 2 things, we had a waste problem on the farm, and we had a fertility problem. We had a waste problem in the feedlot, we were producing what should be a blessing, animal manure, and we had turned it into a toxic waste. And then on the other side, we had a fertility deficit on the farms that we had to remedy with fossil fuel fertilizers. So the challenge is, how do we go back, undo those problems, and go back to the solution that we had before that? So there's much that we need to do on the farms. But, farmers can't diversify unless consumers support them. Right now, many farmers only have one purchaser. When I talk to farmers in Iowa and I say, why are you just growing corn and soy? And they'll say, that's the only thing the elevator wants from me. The elevator won't buy broccoli. And that's absolutely true. So that's the second area we need to work on, the marketplace in which we're all operating. If farms diversify, they're going to need markets and infrastructure. The goal, I think, is to re-regionalize the food economy. That's not exactly the same as saying local. I'm not a locavore, strictly speaking. I think that solution is part of it, but we need somewhat bigger units. We need to be able to support mid-sized farms, not just small artisanal farms. And you do that through a regional food economy with farms big enough to supply institutions, schools, hospitals, prisons. And I think that's where the important work needs to be done. How can you do that? Well, let me talk about why you do that. Why is that a health matter? Well, there was a very interesting, I had a very interesting meeting with somebody a couple weeks ago in my office. He was an architect from MIT named Ken Kaplan. And he had gotten and again, he's an architect, knows nothing about food, knows nothing about farming, knows nothing about healthcare. But he was hired because he's got this good design head to put together a team from MIT and Columbia at the request of one of the big healthcare insurers, United Health. And they said, we want you to think outside the box and give us some solutions for the problem of childhood obesity. And they went out and looked at all the research on childhood obesity and the whole structure of the American food economy. And they came back with a really surprising and not at all intuitive idea after consulting hundreds of people in this whole area, in several whole areas. And that was that one of the ways, and perhaps the key way to address childhood obesity, would be to promote the concept of a food shed. Now, food shed, childhood obesity, what do these have to do with one another? Well, they felt that by regionalizing the food economy, you could reduce people's dependence on what I call edible food-like substances, processed foods from far away, and make access to real food, fresh produce, milk, cheese, real food, meat, make access to that, especially in the inner cities where the problems are most serious. That you could create a certain amount of sovereignty around food, that regions could have more control over their food destiny and be less dependent on these big buyers of agricultural commodities and processors of foods. And that by promoting the idea of a food shed, not that the food shed would feed all, supply all the needs of a city like Madison, but 60, 70%. That this would have a tremendous impact on health. It's a kind of wild idea, and United Healthcare was like, huh? We have to think about food sheds? We were hoping you'd come up with a pill or something, So there is a lot of work being done in this area, and it's very promising. How do you do it? Well, you do it in many, many ways. You build Four Seasons farmers markets so they can go all year long. You require federal and state and city institutions who spend billions on food to spend some small percent of their spending on food within 100 or 200 miles. A local food procurement can do so much to build this local food economy and support the community and support the local economy. Because right now that Cisco truck is taking your money out of this city and very far away. That money's got to stay here. What else can you do? I got a couple other ideas. Oh yeah, this is not a romantic one, but really important. You need really tough antitrust enforcement in the food industry. This is one of the most concentrated industries in America. There are now only 3 companies packing 85% of the beef in this country. You think it's hard to compete? It's hard to do grass-fed beef? Well, yeah, that's why. And they have a lock on all the slaughter facilities, and they can dictate prices to ranchers. There's a rule in antitrust theory that when you have 4 concerns or fewer controlling 40% of the market, you no longer have competition. And that holds true in seeds, where Monsanto is building a huge monopoly, in fertilizer, in grain milling, in dairy, in retailing, in beef, pork, chickens, and animal feed. if we just went back to Eisenhower's level and standards for antitrust enforcement, we would revolutionize the food economy. That's how far we've come. And farmers are not going to make it when price is being dictated by monopolies. So that's one thing we need to do. And there is evidence that this administration is sympathetic to that goal. They're holding hearings around the country on antitrust and food. And when one comes to this area, I urge you to go because they're collecting information and making their plans on what industries they are going to try to break up. So that's another important thing. And we have to look at our nutrition programs, our so-called nutrition programs. Right now, that's what they're called. I'm talking about food stamps, now called the SNAP program. I'm talking about WIC. I'm talking about the school lunch program. All three of them, they're called nutrition programs, but they're not. They provide lots of calories, but not very healthy calories. People on food stamps now are more obese than people not on food stamps. It's bad for your health right now to get on food stamps, believe it or not. That wasn't the idea. We need to put nutrition at the center of these. How do we do that? I'm not sure. But, you know, what if, as many communities are trying, with your food stamps, you got another $30 voucher redeemable at the farmer's market? That would be a win-win situation. So there's a lot of creative thinking in that way, to use the nutrition programs to build up local food economies and put healthier food on people's plates. Because the problem is, if you don't have a lot of money and you're shopping for food, the rational thing to do is to buy junk food. Because every dollar you have, on the processed food aisles, you can get, for that dollar, 1,200 calories of chips and cookies and soda. But if you go to the produce section, you can only get 250 calories of carrots or broccoli. Okay? So if you're poor and you're trying to keep your family going, you're looking for calories, and you will be driven to those aisles. And we have to address that. We have to make the rational choice the healthy choice. So the guiding principle, though, of food sheds is that nations and regions should have some control, some sovereignty over their food destiny, and preserve the ability to feed themselves. This is not a selfish ethic. This is not just for us. We need to be preaching the same idea in the rest of the world. You know, we talk a lot about we need to grow lots of food in America to feed the world. Well, what really happens when we grow lots of food, too much food in America, surplus corn, surplus soy, is that we dump that subsidized grain on the world and compromise the world's ability to feed itself. Because we put farmers out of business. And we saw this in Mexico after NAFTA, when the flood of U.S. corn was admitted. Nearly 2 million Mexican farmers lost their livelihoods. Some of them ended up in the cities, poor, and many of them ended up in this country. This is what drove the wave of immigration over the last 10 or 15 years. So we have to understand that feeding the world is a complicated idea, and the important thing to think about is, how can we help the world feed itself? Now, the last area we need to address, because we are all implicated in this problem, is the food culture. Okay? We are all implicated in a culture of fast, cheap, and easy food that's grown, processed, and moved around with fossil fuel. We need to learn to eat from a shorter food chain. None of this works unless people cook. None of this works unless people know how to cook. How do we do that? Well, that's a big task, changing the food culture. Some of it's about storytelling, making people appreciate the value of really well-grown food grown in their community. But we're really going to have to teach our children. We have to teach our children how to eat lunch. I know Alice Waters was here a few years ago. I think she was here a few years ago. And, you know, she has this wacky idea, or so it sounds, that we should give kids credit for lunch. Academic credit. And when I first heard that, I said, that's pretty wacky. But of course, we give them credit for physical education. What is that not an equally important life skill, to know how to eat lunch, to know what is at stake, what is going on? And, you know, I've come to see her point. I think she's absolutely right. We need to teach children about growing food with gardens in the schools. We need cooking classes. I don't think you should be able to graduate from 9th grade without knowing how to roast a chicken. I think that's a very important life skill. And we need to teach them how to eat. Now, this sounds very paternalistic. I'm saying sit kids down, give them a half hour at a table, platters, tables, knives and forks. This is also a very important life skill. Now, if it sounds paternalistic, you know, the government should teach kids how to eat lunch. Well, consider that the government is now teaching them how to eat lunch. When you give kids chicken nuggets and tater tots and 10 minutes to eat, you are teaching them a way of eating. You are training the next generation of fast food customers. And we need to change the next generation of slow food customers. Now, we need to teach adults too. And one of the ways we do that is more transparency in our food system. What about a second calorie count on every package of food that tells you not just how many fat calories or carbohydrate calories are in it, but how many fossil fuel calories are in it? So you can look at a package of hamburger meat and see, yeah, it's a little cheaper, but geez, 55 calories of fossil fuel for every 1 calorie of meat. And then over here is this grass-fed meat, and hey, it's negative. Or it's got 5 calories of fossil fuel to do 1 calorie of, because all this carbon's been sequestered in the process. And that you could look at a soda and see how many calories of fossil fuel are in it. You know, not everybody would pay attention, not everybody reads calorie counts, but enough people would, and they would be able to make those often very complex decisions. Because there are times when food grown close to you has a bigger carbon footprint than food from far away, and it's important to know when that is true, because food miles are not the last word on this. You've got to look at the whole production system. So, but we have the science, we know how to do that, and I think that'd be very useful for teaching us. And then we need, you know, the bully pulpit. We need, I think, on this cultural matter, we need exactly what we're getting from Michelle Obama. How great is it that there is now an organic garden on the White House lawn? And that the First Lady is speaking out regularly about the importance of fresh food, real food, getting away from processed food, and the importance of cooking for your family. She is, in a way, kind of redefining slightly our understanding of what it means to be a good parent. That includes cooking real food for your kids. That being a good parent is not necessarily taking your kids to McDonald's whenever they want to go. But it is like reading to your kids, a very important function of parenting. She's getting that message, of course, and I think she's raising consciousness about school lunch, and she has made this her issue, and I think that that's a very important thing. Gardening is not trivial. Gardening is a part of the solution. Gardens do a lot. They produce lots of healthy food. For people who say, I can't afford to eat organically, well, if you've got space for a garden, you can. The National Gardening Association just issued a study where they said a $60 investment in a home garden can yield $200 worth of fresh produce. That you will not find produce that is more nutritious, fresher, more delicious than the food you can grow yourself. At the same time, you'll be sequestering carbon, you'll be getting exercise without getting in your car to drive to the gym. And you will be, to paraphrase Wendell Berry again, breaking the hold of that cheap energy mind mindset that is telling you every day that you can't do anything for yourself, that you need an expert somewhere far away to entertain you, to feed you, to clothe you, to do everything for you. When you start using your body in support of your body by growing just a little bit of food, you realize that, you can do something for yourself. You don't need fossil fuel to make a move. So I think that's a really important, and it is a reminder how much is given. That the sun still shines down on our yards, and photosynthesis can still work its wonders wherever it does. It is the ultimate reminder of the free lunch in your yard every day. So, in conclusion, what happens now? Well, nothing unless we organize and bring pressure. Much stands in the way. Opposition is building. The kind of protests that we saw on Thursday are happening all over the country now, when I speak and when other people speak. The industry has woken up and taken notice. We're going through those stages that Gandhi talked about, of being ignored and then being ridiculed and then being fought. We're entering the fight stage. A friend of mine had occasion to meet with Michelle Obama and Barack Obama. I've never met them. And to prepare a dinner for them and talk to them about some of these issues. And it was an interesting conversation, and he was making a lot of the points I'm making to you, a lot of points you would make, I think, to the President and the First Lady if you had a chance. And this is before they took office. This is right before they took office. And, he was like, I get it, but I don't see a movement. Show me the movement. And he was basically indicating that he didn't feel enough pressure to move. And he understood the pressure on the other side. And he understood, too, how politics works. When I heard the story, it reminded me of, I don't know if you've read this history, but Lyndon Johnson meeting with Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King came to him and said, we need a Voting Rights Act. We need your help. In the same way that people have come to the president and said, we need your help reforming the food system. And Johnson said this. He said, make me do it. Go out and make me do it. That's how politics works. And that's what we need to do now. We need to go out and show them the movement. So let's go out and make them do it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Great time. Thank you so much.
Okay, we have time for a few questions, and Michael has graciously agreed to answer some. We have microphones, however, and please make sure you have a microphone so everyone can hear the question, so Michael can hear the question. And where are the mics? Great, there's one right there. And do you have a question?
I just have a comment.
Okay, where is that?
Oh, okay.
Right here.
Hi, I'm Carrie Johnson from Jorndale Farms. I have a booth here on the farmers market, and we sell grass-based raised meats. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank Michael for coming, to thank REAP for having this wonderful festival. I hope everybody learned a lot and will continue on this path. Also come and see me at the stand. This is just wonderful. This turnout is just great. So I can't emphasize enough how REAP has helped our business. We started selling to restaurants about 2.5 years ago, and it's actually made 2 farms sustainable. So I really urge everyone to support them. They do wonderful work. I just can't say enough about them. So enjoy the rest of the festival, and thank you very much. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Okay. Another question right there with the microphone. Oh, I'm sorry, you're standing. Go ahead, and then we'll go there.
2 questions kind of together. Do you know when do you predict that the resource of petroleum and natural gas is going to cause a real big problem for conventional farming? How soon do you see that happening? We talked about peak oil a few years ago. And the other one, do you know the history? What's happening right now? I know in Wisconsin that our milk prices are down to like $9 a hundredweight.
Well, on the milk prices, I can't tell you. I don't know enough, and it'd be presumptuous of me to comment on what's going on in the economy. I mean, I know that productivity has been fantastic, and you're producing more milk than can be absorbed by the market. But you have new competitors. There are people growing a lot of milk in the desert these days, in California, in my state, and I think that has hurt. But I can't speak with any kind of authority on that subject, so I shouldn't. On oil prices, we don't know. I don't know when peak oil is going to be. I'm not an expert on that, but we had a taste of that in the summer of 2008, when we saw fuel prices get very high, and look what followed. Food prices got very high. Fertilizer prices went through the roof. Very sensitive to oil prices. I think that was a real shot across the bow of just how dependent and how linked the energy economy is and the food economy, and that we have to de-link them to some extent. We had a situation where people were going hungry all around the world because of ethanol had driven up grain prices, and that was piled onto by speculators. And what happened then was very interesting, is that people there were riots in 35 countries around food prices. And people realized that throwing their own economies at the mercy of the world grain market might not be such a smart thing. Because they were suddenly at the mercy of decisions about ethanol made in the White House, and at the decisions of speculators on Wall Street. This was affecting the ability of the Philippines to feed their own people. So I think that was a wake-up call, that countries need a little more control over their food destiny than they have. And you see even the World Bank, even the Clinton Global Initiative, turning away from this idea that free trade in food will solve all problems. Clinton said himself, I realized after that spike that food is not like television sets. And this is someone who had been pushing a free trade agenda for a very long time, that the ability of countries to grow their own food and regions to grow their own food was too important to their security, and that food security was a matter of national security.
You had something on milk prices.
Yes. And I'm John Kinsman, and I'm an organic dairy farmer, a good friend of George Namath, president of the Family Farm Defenders. I wrote the press release you looked at our booth.
Oh, okay.
And that cheese in the Farm Defenders booth is from my cows, organic, and I was pasturing them this morning, so I got here late. But the whole milk price is political. There's a shortage in this country of good milk for over 12 years, and they're importing through the free trade, the NAFTA especially, importing milk solids that are not healthy, milk protein concentrates that are not even approved. They're a glue product, and these corporations are putting that into cheese to make a surplus. So the whole thing of pricing is political.
Thank you. It's a great story.
Question, where's the mic? There we go. Thank you.
As a Madison public school teacher, we're working with REAP right now to get fresh fruit and vegetables into our schools here. What can we do as teachers? What's our next step to help with school lunch reform?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's one of the most important initiatives in this movement, because it solves so many problems at once. I don't know if you're familiar with what Slow Food is trying to do, but they have a big initiative, Slow Food USA, around school lunch, and they had a eat-in on Labor Day, and they're really trying to create an organization to advance change at the federal level. This fall will be, or over the winter, will be the school lunch reauthorization. I think we need some organized action in Washington. I think we need, thousands of school teachers to show up when they start having hearings on the school lunch reauthorization, and make people understand that this is, a vital issue. We need $1 a day per child to really feed them well. That's what Ann Cooper says, and she knows a lot about this. You should also get Ann Cooper to come speak here next year. And she's the school lunch lady who was in Berkeley. She calls herself that, by the way. And now she's in Boulder. And she's thought more about this than anybody else. So I think look at some of the organized politics going on around it, because as much as you can do locally, the rules are going to be set federally very soon. And those rules, as often happens, dictate outcomes and what's possible.
Another question? Right there. Thank you.
Yes, I was just wondering if you think the petroleum companies are...
Could you hold it a little closer to your mouth?
Sorry. I was just wondering if you think the petroleum companies are aware enough to have a pushback for the labeling you were suggesting for the fuel calories. Like the GMO labeling, there's this huge pushback.
Be meat from 200 different animals from 4 different countries. Can you imagine if you bought a hamburger patty and said, product of meat from the United States, New Zealand, Argentina, and Canada? You would think, wait a minute, what are they all doing there? Why can't I just have the meat from one cow? So yeah, they'll fight us, there's no question.
RP.
Wonderful to have you here. As a small food producer, I'm a manufacturer. We do pasta, and I buy a lot of local foods to manufacture. I'm curious about your opinion on, when you look at the whole input. You mentioned packaging. That's always an issue as a producer to get food from the farm to the table. It typically has, other than a farmer's market. Your thoughts on the corn-based products that we can use as packaging versus some of the other plastic, PVCs that are petroleum-based in production, but moving some of that agriculture into that aspect?
The whole issue of making things out of corn, plastics essentially. I mean, corn can be used to make almost anything that oil does. The problem is it often takes a lot of oil to do that. And the last time I looked into this, and this goes back about 5 years, it was still taking more fossil fuel energy to make those corn-based, say, forks and knives and utensils. I don't know whether the technology has gotten better. It's a really good question to ask someone who does these life cycle assessments. But the question to ask yourself is how many fossil fuel calories are in a corn-based cellophane or plastic. And if it comes out ahead, yeah, it's a great idea. But as of a few years ago, it did not.
Right here, please.
Yes, I'm Bob, and I'm from Northeast Wisconsin. I'm really happy to hear you start talking about cooking and about the culture around food. And I'm wondering if you're thinking anything about interesting business models that are between the customer and the producer that are local partnerships. And I think that's really an important component of it, because let's face it, we're not going to have time to cook everything ourselves. So there needs to be innovative models that are actually a partnership between the producer and the consumer, and do serve as middlemen. Not the Cisco's, but is that anything you're looking into currently?
I haven't looked into it, but I think you're right. I mean, I think there are. I think we need to rebuild a culture of cooking, as I was saying the other night. We have to do it very differently. I'm not talking about, as the newspaper said this morning, re-enslaving women. I'm talking about enslaving men as well. But I actually find cooking kind of liberating. But there are people who are not going to cook every night, and we have to figure out ways for them to be able to eat wholesome food that is well cooked. Other people will cook for people, and the challenge is getting them to cook in a way that is healthy. There's no reason it can't be done. I think it can't be done like 6 months ago and served today. There's a lot of processing that happens as long as you make food designed for a very long shelf life. That's when you get into trouble. And you need somehow to discourage the easy move on the part of a food service, which is lots of salt, lots of sugar, lots of fat. These are very simple ways to make food seem attractive and cover up the deficiencies of the ingredients or the deficiencies of the process. But yeah, I mean, I think we need innovative ideas. I think we need common kitchens where, there are some businesses now where people come together, parents come together, and they cook 3 or 4 meals together. The isolation of cooking, I think, was part of what many women hated about it, and the lack of esteem for cooking. And I think to the extent you can do it with other people, whether it's your spouse or your neighbors, I think that also has the potential to help. So I think we have to try a lot of things.
Ruth, and then I think we'll have time for one other question. Okay.
I think what some of the people who have criticized you have been talking in terms of starvation, that you're leading to starvation.
I support mass starvation, just so you know.
But one of the concepts is they talk about is in terms of not having enough land and things like that. My concern isn't as much land, because I do think we probably have enough land to grow food. But do we have the farmers to grow this, have the system that you're talking about, and how do we encourage people? I mean, the average age of farmers is like 58 years old.
Yeah, and you heard that the average age of organic farmers is 53, which is proof that organic farming makes you young. Somebody told me that the other day. You're absolutely right. I think number of farmers is a bigger problem than acres of land. And that, we are growing this whole nation's food with less than 2 million farmers. I think 1 million full-time farmers. And we will not be able to do it with, as that fossil fuel is squeezed out of the system, we will have to replace some of that energy with human energy and human ingenuity. And that we will need more farmers on the land. I don't think that's a bad thing. But I think we have to make it easy for people to get into farming. And part of my ideas in this Sun Food agenda is to make land available to farmers, to get, there's so much land locked up by land trusts today that could be leased to farmers on a long-term basis. There's so many landowners sitting on land that they're not farming anymore. And that we have to do that. I think we have to train farmers too. We need a very organized system, especially in the kinds of solar farming techniques that I've written about, to get more people on the land. I think that is the limiting factor. There is enough land. I mean, when you consider that we are, half of the food we're growing is going to feed animals, there's a whole lot of slack in that we should not be growing so much food for animals. Frances Moore Lappé was right. She said this in 1971, that you can't be taking half the grain you're growing and giving it to animals and expect to feed the world long term. So there's that slack. And there is also, though, it is a myth that small farms and sustainable farms are less productive. I have seen astonishing amounts of food come off very small farms. They will be more labor intensive, it is true. But the problem is not that organic can't produce enough food. It's that we don't have enough farmers. And we have to, and that's one of the reasons we've been demeaning farming in this country for 100 years. The government's policy has been to reduce the number of farmers because they wanted more workers in factories. And so, in guidance counselors' offices all over the Farm Belt, for the last how many generations, they have been, picking the A students and saying, you're going to go to college and you're going to leave the farm. And, we have also had a brain drain on the farm as a result, something farmers tell me all the time. And that brain drain has been replaced with, the brain power of geneticists in St. Louis selling solutions in bottles and in seeds. And so we need to elevate the prestige of farming in our culture. Farmers have been the butt of jokes until very recently in our culture, right? I mean, that's what the butt of jokes in cartoons and movies, and that's changing, I think. I think in the same way that we now look at chefs as productive members of society and not as, kind of baubles of the rich. We are now beginning to look at farmers and realize that they hold the solution to many of our problems, that the work they do is really hard and takes a great amount of skill. And so to the extent that in the same way as this is a glamour-driven society, in the same way we've elevated the prestige of chefs, and look how many people are going to culinary school and want to become chefs, not an easy job either, we need to do the same thing with farmers. And
yeah, we really want to be able to accommodate everybody who wants a book signed. So one last question, please.
Well, I just wanted to thank you for those kind words about my profession. And I've been doing this for about 10 years. And I've been on this journey for a little over 10 years. And although your Omnivores wasn't quite as influential on me because I had already read Wes Jackson, and I lived near the Land Institute in Kansas, I did really like your picture about the American Dionysus in your first book, The Botany of Desire.
Thank you.
I really recommend that. But I heard you say something about not quite knowing something about milk, and I realized that a lot of people here don't know a lot of things, and your Omnivores kind of dealt with meat, and your most recent book was kind of about vegetables, and I thought maybe you could turn the same lens towards milk.
You want a book about milk?
Yes. Specifically, most people don't realize that Eau Claire is the pricing destination, and until Wisconsin and Ovi have help, they won't be able to counteract the lobby of New York, Florida, and California, because they make more for milk because they're farther away from Eau Claire. So until that law from 100-some years ago is changed, our farmers have a disadvantage, and the high, happy California milk on their drugs has an advantage that is not according to the market. So thank you very much.
Well, the advantage you have here in Wisconsin, of course, is beautiful grass. And you can do things that our dairy farmers in California can't do. And those two milks might look the same, but they're not the same. And what we need to do is to teach consumers the difference, and to understand that, and to value and appreciate your milk and pay you a fair price for it. Thank you so much.
Folks, Michael Pollan.